Hello and welcome back to Seriously Good TV. I hope everyone is doing well and are excited for Christmas and our relaxing breaks are just around the corner. Last week we dove into the topic of the Cold War, and this week we have a little clip to sum up what we're going to show, so maybe we'll get that coming up very shortly. As you have seen, we are going to be talking about Jack the Ripper, who we think he is, and by we I mean myself, Taz and Oscar. As you can see in this VT, by the way, apologies that the audio is gone. Of course, this is such old audio that you can't actually, hear anything. But you can see the beautiful city of London back in Victorian era. This is probably quite recent videos though, however, because filming was very probably early 1900s. So this is probably at the end of Victorian era, more like. But yeah, great clip nonetheless. Anyways, where was I? Sorry, I really went sidetracked there. We're going to be talking about the Jack the Ripper. We went on a Jack the Ripper tour, in fact, and we're going to learn more about Victorian Britain in general. Now, let's get started. So, viewers, I'm now going to show you our journey of the Jack the Ripper tour. So, ready, So everybody, are you ready to dive into the world of eerie Victorian London? Alright, without further ado, studio, roll the VT. Tonight I'm going to see Jack the Ripper with the Jack the Ripper tour actually, and we're going to go explore all the places where the people were murdered, learn more about him, learn more about the life in Victorian times. Personally for me, I'm a big history fan, so I really enjoy learning all this kind of stuff. I like learn a bit about it, history itself, you know. We've seen the letters, we've seen the evidence, we've seen the brutal murders, but to go and actually like see where these murders are, that's really a nice experience for me, and that's why I can't wait to go and see what we're going to find. I expect it to be quite gruesome. I expect that the person is going to tell us a lot about what's happened. I bet he has lots of knowledge about all the things that could probably happen to these people. A little bit informative too, because I always like to learn more about this, because it's such an interesting thing. There's one guy was able to just absolutely just sliver his way through everyone and to somehow get away with it all without being prosecuted. It's truly amazing. So do I think that Jack the Ripper's been glamorised? Probably a little bit, to be honest. You know, all this media and all this buzz around him, he's like such a well-known name. The media, of course, can make so much profit out of it. Pretty much anyone can. Everyone knows who he is. He's probably one of the most famous serial killers around, so of course he's probably been glorified just a little bit. For me, personally, I don't think that he will ever be found out. I think it's too long now. There's not enough evidence. There's no nothing. It's literally a dead road right now, and it probably will be for the rest of time. Okay, now we've finished up. Let's just go see what this is all about.
So finally, the team begin their creepy tour through the back streets of London's notorious East End. They meet up with local tour guide John Bennett, ready for the tour to begin.
Welcome to the East End of London, a uniquely historic part of the city, which, to be honest with you, has not always had a good history. Nowadays, a lot of people think of the East End as a place where you come and have fun. It's known for hipster culture, nightlife and street art, some of which you can see down here. But the older history of the East End of London, certainly in the late 19th century, was nothing to be proud of, I have to say. For many decades, many people thought this unique part of town was the worst slum in London. And it's from that horrible neighbourhood that the East End was thought of as being that perhaps one of the most infamous stories London has produced came to be. 1888, officially the Whitechapel murders, although most people will call them the murders of Jack the Ripper. That's the name of that infamous serial killer, perhaps one of the first mainly documented serial killers. That's the name that he's become known as. 30% of the people living here were not surviving. They were struggling to survive every day, living below the poverty line, many living in squalid tenements, perhaps in alleyways like this one, filthy cottages that were not fit for living in. It was not unusual to find the poorest of the poor, that 30%, living 10 to a room, 10 foot by 12 foot with no indoor sanitation. Disease was rife, but it was also known for high levels of crime because the poverty created criminal activity, a survival mechanism basically for anybody doing it, and in the East End back then that included men, women and children. It made the area extremely difficult to police. No, it made it impossible to police, and it made it very dangerous for the officers of H Division Whitechapel, the Metropolitan Police, whose job it was to try and keep law and order in this area. But women in the East End of London, if they were faced with abject poverty, often, because they had less choices, less opportunities in the Victorian era, prostitution often would be a means to an end. None of the women doing it because they wanted to, it's just sheer desperation that drove them on the streets. And often with no place to go, being destitute and often homeless, they were cheap. 4 pence, that's how much a prostitute apparently charged her men in those days in this area. That's about £1.70 or thereabouts in today's money. But also they had nowhere to take the men, so everything they did was often done outdoors, of course in the quietest places they can find. Dark, miserable alleyways like the one we just walked up, any back sort of round little back alleyways, behind gateways, even people's houses, if they could get in it, they would use your landings or your backyard, making them extremely vulnerable to attack from thieves, gangs of youths who just used to beat these women up for fun. I mean, it was a dangerous job. It still is to this day. And it is from that class, I think we would like to say that, which many people believe the Whitechapel murderer took his victims. Okay? Now, I guess we'll never really know how many victims there actually were, but most people believe 5 is the number of what they call the canonical 5 victims. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, right, in that order. 5 names in our history books for very unfortunate reasons. So, if you believe that there were 5 victims, some people believe there were more than 5. Mary Ann Nichols is believed to be the first of the 5, who died on August 31st, 1888, in a street a fair distance from here, known then as Bucks Road. She was 42 years of age. Her husband and her had broken up in about 1881, and like many of these women, it was because of her drink problem. They all suffered from what we I suppose would call alcoholism today, and she'd been spending much of the remaining 7 years living on the streets, living in very rough lodging houses, and it was on the 31st of August 1888, we know, she was thrown out of her lodging house just down back here in an area called the Flower and Dean Estate, because she had no money for her regular bed in her lodging house. She was drunk, she'd obviously spent all her money on alcohol, and she walked away from that lodging house confidently stating she would be back soon. 2 hours later, she was found dead in that street, Bucks Road, away from here, by 2 men on their way to work. She's lying dead on the ground, her throat is cut twice. One of these cuts has gone right the way down to her spine. And worse than that, when they got her body in the mortuary later on, they realised, shockingly, that she'd been cut open from the groin to the breastbone, and apparently you could see the intestines in the gap.
So apparently she was found dead like this, cut across here and across all the way up here. You could see the intestines, it's all it.
So we're standing by Christchurch Spittlefield, which has been standing there since 1729. Spittlefields, this area here, today is trendy and has been for a number of decades. In the time of the Whitechapel murders, this area was probably the worst area in the whole of the East End. Now, across the road, there used to be a street known as Dorset Street, which was once known as the worst street in London. That's how bad Spittlefields was. Annie Chapman, who would become later on the second victim of the Whitechapel murders, lived there for the last 2 years of her life in poverty when her drink problem finally broke up her marriage to her husband John. In a scenario very, very similar to what happened to Mary Ann Nichols 8 days earlier, Annie Chapman, drunk, is thrown out of her lodging house in Dorset Street because she doesn't have the 4 pence for her bed. She walks out of the door and says, "Don't worry, I'll soon be back." And then several hours later, I'm afraid to say, she was found dead in the most horrific way round the corner in Hanbury Street in Spittlefields. The second victim, Annie Chapman, was found dead in the backyard of a slum house, number 29 Hanbury Street, a house that would have looked at the time when it was here very much like some of these along here. What was shocking about this murder is that her throat, again, had been cut twice, but all the way round to the bone, so the only thing stopping her head rolling off was her spine, which was almost decapitated. There was a gaping wound in the abdomen from which the murderer had lifted out her intestines, detached them, and draped them over her shoulder for all to see. And then later on, during the autopsy, as they examined her body, it was discovered that for the first, and not the last time, one of the victims had internal organs removed. And it was the way it was done, in the opinion of the doctor, did that autopsy, that gave birth to one of the more enduring legends in this story. He believed whoever did it had medical knowledge.
So much like the first victim, Annie Chapman had her throat slit round to the back with only her spine holding her head on, and her tummy was slit open with her intestines dangling over her shoulder.
One of the most famous, if not the most famous building in the whole Ripper saga is the 10 Bells pub over the road. Often thought of as the pub where all the victims drank, which may not be unreasonable to assume as they all lived very close by. It is apparently where Annie Chapman, the second victim, was allegedly seen drinking alone on the morning, of her murder. She was lured out by a man with a hideous face. She walked out with him, and the story claims she was found dead 1 hour later.
The team now endeavour to remove their parents from said pub in order to continue the tour. However, it proves to be rather difficult.
Up until the second murder, one of Annie Chapman, the murderer was known locally as Leather Apron, named after a prime suspect, a man named John Pizer, who would assault prostitutes and try and rob them wearing a leather apron, which is what he used to wear at work. He was a boot mender. And so that was the name for fear on the streets. The murderer was known locally as Leather Apron. Some people called him the Fiend of the East End or the East End Monster. It wasn't until the end of September that we get the name that this murderer is famous for. Jack the Ripper, and that came from this letter, which was received by a newspaper agency on the 27th of September. Okay? The letter, written in red ink, claimed to be written by the murderer himself, mocking the authorities, threatening horrible things to his next victims, but what was important about it is that the author signed it at the end, yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Okay, so on the 30th of September, Jack shocks everybody by killing Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes on the same night. What was unusual, the murder of Elizabeth Stride, the third victim, which took place down in Barnett Street off the commercial road, she was only had her throat cut. There were no mutilations to the rest of her body. And they often believe that the man who discovered her body, Louis Deemschutz, entering the alleyway that she was found dead on a pony and cart, interrupted Jack before he could do any mutilations and take any organs. And that's why they believe that when he found the opportunity to get away, he ran off looking for another victim. First victim, one cut throat. Catherine Eddowes, she has 2 cuts in the throat going to the spine. The knife left grooves in the vertebrae. That's how violently it was done. Her face was deliberately cut through the eyelids, the lips, the nose was cut off, and there were these strange V shapes cut into the cheeks. She was opened up from the groin to the breastbone, opened out. The intestines were found thrown out over her shoulder, and shockingly they discovered that she was missing her uterus and her left kidney. And they think all of that was done in some way, in less than 10 minutes in the dark.
So this is Elizabeth Stride, the first victim of the night, and what's different about her murder was the fact that she only had 1 cut across her neck, and many people believe that she was interrupted, that the killer was interrupted during the killing, which is why she was only discovered with 1 cut across her neck.
Unlike Elizabeth, Catherine here had many cuts, predominantly on her face, although she did have the stereotypical cut throat and many missing organs. However, it was believed that Jack actually took more time on her, as he couldn't finish the first victim.
Last murder in the series, the 5th, 9th of November 1888, Mary Jane Kelly, the most famous victim, the youngest victim, and the only one of the 5 women murdered indoors. Mary Jane Kelly was literally ripped and hacked to pieces. That is not an exaggeration. From the top down, her face was mutilated beyond all recognition, her throat cut all the way round to the spine. The flesh from her neck down to her thighs stripped off and was lying in pieces between her legs or piled up on the bedside table. Every organ from her body had been removed and was also lying on the table. They found parts of her body under her head, under her feet. The flesh on her thighs was stripped down to the bone. That was also lying on the bed. And that's not enough. When they did the autopsy later on, which took nearly 6 hours, it took 3 surgeons that time to do it, they discovered that the murderer had removed her heart.
So this was Mary Jane Kelly, the 5th and allegedly final victim of the Jack the Ripper. She was the most brutally murdered victim, with pretty much every single organ from her head down to her thighs ripped out. During the autopsy, it was discovered that her heart had been ripped out, and all of the skin on her thighs down to her knees was completely ripped off from the bone.
Speaking of popular myths, from my limited knowledge previously, I heard that maybe he was left-handed.
That is one of the popular myths. It doesn't go around very often. That comes from the first murder, when Dr. Llewellyn, who did the autopsy, suggested that the way that the cut in Mary Ann Nichols' throat was done, it suggested someone who was working left-handed.
Can I also ask, was it just England that was suffering with this serial murderer? Was there any other places that was truly terrified of the murderer, or is it just him being so significant?
It's a strange one. I can't think of any other sort of true murder case, serial killer case, where you literally have people panicking on the streets, hundreds of people chasing one man just because he was being chased by a policeman for something.
So what other myths were there?
At the time,
Yeah.
yeah,
in general.
the myths were that he was Jewish. There was a very high number of Jewish immigrants in the area at the time, and what with, I suppose, xenophobia, racism and things like that, they just assumed a foreigner would do this. So, I mean, a lot of those people being attacked in the street would be Jewish immigrants who come over from Eastern Europe. We will never know whether that is the case or not. So maybe later on there's the idea, again, that he may well have been a medical man, although that is something that the doctors all seem to disagree on. Some said yes, some said no. Ideas that he wore a top hat and a cape, that idea that we think of Jack the Ripper, which is actually a very new image. that idea of the gentleman Jack. And what you'll find is at the time, most of the newspapers and illustrated newspapers portrayed the murderer as a man with sort of like a little peaked cap, like a rough working class kind. Those are some of the sort of the big myths that have been floating around ever since.
Okay, so that's it for the tour. Personally, I learned loads of new interesting things, and I hope you guys did too. I found it really interesting seeing what life was like in the 18th century and how people would have lived and how terrified they were during that time. I'd like to say a big thank you to John Bennett, our tour guide and Discovery Tours, for making this possible. And once again, thank you for watching.
Of course, we'd like to throw in a few factual errors to check in that you are all on your toes. Thank you for watching that, by the way. Of course, at the end there, Emily meant the 1800s or the 19th century. Well done to those of you who have spotted it. Okay then, guys, I've got a couple questions too that have just popped up into the chat. We were just reading through them earlier on. Melanie says, I've just eaten my dinner. Perhaps I shouldn't have waited until after I'd watched. Yeah, it tends to be that the Jack the Ripper had some pretty brutal deaths, let's just say that. Would you feel comfortable living in Whitechapel even after all these years? Actually, these are good questions that I'll ask when we have Taz and Oscar on, which is very shortly. Speaking of which, actually, no, let's bring them on now so we can answer the rest of these questions. So, in digital form, we now have Taz and Oscar. Please, Taz and Oscar.
Hello! I realised we were over the intro. Oops.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's all right. But brilliant. Look, we have these two now to answer your questions as well, because we have a few now. So I'm just going to, before we carry on now, because we didn't really script this bit, let's just talk through these questions. Melanie says, would you feel comfortable living in Whitechapel even after all these years? Let's start with Taz. What do you think?
I think if it was daytime, sure. I think it would be fine, daytime.
That is true. I mean, my personal view is the exact same. I think London at night, it's pretty stressful.
Terrifying.
It's stressful and it could be at some points kind of scary. Oscar, what's your thoughts about Whitechapel?
Well, I think now that I would be all right because it was so long ago, but knowing me, I would probably be terrified. So probably not.
Yeah, fair enough. Not, yeah. But yeah, that's our answer towards Whitechapel. Brian says, takes me back to my days as a dental student at London. We also had the Elephant Man, another topic for you. I believe Elephant Man was, I can't remember, I remember that rings a bell. That does ring a bell.
I have no clue over it, honestly. I don't think I've ever heard it.
I'm trying to remember what elephant. I think it's a man who has great deformities. I'm pretty sure. That's my guess, anyways. Let's carry on. Here's a question. How do you think the problems of those days compare with the challenges for many today, especially with financial efforts of COVID-19, such as homelessness and domestic violence? So, guys, do you have anything to say to this? How do you think the problems of those days compare with the challenges of COVID-19? So, a mass serial killer on the loose, who no one knows about, pretty scary, but being locked inside and having a deadly disease. What one's more scary to you?
I'm going to say mass serial killer, because you don't go outside.
Yeah, mass serial killer.
The mass serial killer can come inside.
You cracked the case there,
Yeah,
guys.
definitely the mass serial killer.
Yeah.
But if I was to play the devil's advocate here, it is still pretty scary to have, especially in those times.
It's terrifying.
Yeah, to have someone you know that hasn't been caught, that's been out killing multiple women. That's quite intense.
No, that is definitely terrifying, especially if I was like out there and it was still like around today. I probably wouldn't go to London, honestly.
Okay.
Not that I am currently. But...
Brilliant. That's all the time we'll have for questions at the moment, because we need to carry on now. Right, back to you just saw our little tour of Jack the Ripper tour. How did you find it, guys? Taz, how did you find it?
I really enjoyed it, honestly. I thought it was really interesting. I've always kind of liked the Victorian age, so I thought it was like kind of fun to learn specifically just about that.
Yeah. What bits really stuck out to you while you were there?
This might sound a little bit odd, and it's probably a very common opinion, but I think the way that he murdered was really like interesting, because it's so specific. It's kind of like he planned it, in my opinion.
Yeah, fair enough. Oscar, did you enjoy it, and did you have any bits that really stuck out in your mind?
Yeah, it was really interesting and fun to do. But the things that stood out in my mind were the same as Tamsin. The murders, I wouldn't say I enjoyed it necessarily, but it was really interesting, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, I was about to say, I mean, if you said that you enjoyed the murders, that you're pretty much on the edge of being a psychopath at that point. So that kind of scared me there, Oscar. It's pretty stressful. I'm glad that there's a screen between us right now, Oscar, because I'd be pretty terrified if you just said that you enjoyed murders right next to me.
There's definitely perks to being the other side of the screen.
Yeah, you both said you enjoyed the murders. Yeah, that's kind of terrifying.
I just thought they were interesting.
Yeah, okay. All right. Anyways, so one of the main questions that makes Jack the Ripper so notorious is his identity. To this day, historians speculate, like what we are about to do, about who he was. So, guys, what are your ideas about who he was? Just be clear, we've done a rehearsal and we've not spoken about this yet. So this is just purely us. If there's any similarities, it's purely coincidental. So, Taz, do you want to start us off, please?
I can start, yeah. So I did a little bit of research, honestly not too much, so there's definitely other options, but I think from the research that I've done, and I can't remember if it was mentioned in the VT, but there's a guy called Joseph Barnett, I think that's how it's pronounced, but he had connections with one of the victims, Mary, matched his physical description that witnesses had given, and also the psychological profile. And I thought that was really interesting because it's not very common for a psychological profile to match very closely.
Yeah.
From what I remember.
Yeah.
But I'll just keep it short there.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough. Oscar, what do you have any suspicions on who do you think this murderer is?
Yeah. So I also did a bit of research. And I think it was a man called Aaron Kosminski. And so I found out that there are some DNA samples which are proving that he is most likely responsible for the murders. So, yeah, I think it was him.
Yeah, fair enough, guys. For me,
I wasn't aware that was DNA.
Pardon, sorry?
I wasn't aware there was DNA samples that they could get because it was such a long time ago. That's very cool.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, to be honest. I didn't want to mention that. But yeah, that is quite incredible that, we're this far and we could actually go back in time that much to find DNA samples. That's crazy. In my opinion, I think it could have been anyone. It could have been a woman. It could have been a man that has never been mentioned before. My teacher was speaking about how it could have been this Polish butcher who was in an asylum beforehand, I think he mentioned. But altogether, though, it just shows that we will never probably know who it is fully. To this day. But what do you guys think at home? Comment down below, or whatever side it is, your theories about what it is, because we'd love to hear it. Anyways, right, next topic of this is, of course, the Victorian Britain in general. Well, like many errors, there will be good and there will be bad. But the differences were huge. It was a time of terrible poverty, poor health and low life expectancy. There were terrible living conditions for the poor, yet we were at the height of the British Empire, which itself brought good and bad. Yet these were times of innovation. With the Industrial Revolution, of course this had bad effects, however, such as pollution. There was improvements to healthcare and education. Just before Queen Victoria took the throne, slavery was outlawed, voting rights were improved, although not for women yet. Sanitation was also improved and an underground railroad system was built. Overseas, travel opened up to a larger population. The list goes on, but these improvements were not for all, and in many ways the class divide increased and the bad became worse, while the good became better. Let's take a closer look at these contradictions, please. Oscar?
Yes, so one example is policing. In 1829, then Home Secretary Robert Peel brought in the Metropolitan Police Act, and with it came the peelers or bobbies. A great thing, you would think, to control crime.
Yes, that is true. However, out of the, I think it was 2,800 police recruited, due to distrust from the public and corruption within the new police force, 2,200 were discharged in the first 4 hours on the job.
Wow, impressive knowledge there, Tans. Wow, that's impressive.
But first, English lesson.
Let's first talk more in depth about both sides, the good side and the bad side. Starting with the bad side. You've looked into this, Oscar, haven't you, the bad side?
That's true. So can we have the first photo, please? Divorce wasn't a thing, so men sold unwanted wives, which obviously isn't okay. Next image, please. Some people ate corpses as medicine, and we know now that that is obviously disgusting and didn't actually have any effect at all. Next photo, please. Children were used as chimney sweeps and were usually not paid, and this was obviously very, very damaging to their health. Next photo, please. Cosmetics were often toxic or damaging. Next photo, please. There were workhouses, and child labour, malnutrition, and beatings were very common in workhouses. Next image, please. There was a short life expectancy, especially for children with a life expectancy of 5. Next photo, please. Open sewers ran along streets in poor areas, which is obviously very unsanitary. Next photo, please. Dead bodies were often kept at home following deaths for mourning. So overall, Victorian Britain was not a very nice time to be living in.
Okay, thank you very much, Oscar. And I've just had another look at the live chat, and there's some good conversations going on in there. It's very, very good to see, you know, everyone getting involved in this. But now, how about Oscar? You were talking about the bad side, and it's good. It's good, honestly, just to see from the bad side and see how far we've come to a way better place. You know, times have changed so much for the better, because back in the day, the Victorian era life was pretty miserable for most people, to be honest.
Well, you say that, and yes, I agree, it was definitely miserable. There were definitely good parts, because there were many new inventions during this time.
Okay, like what's happening?
Well, photography for starters.
Okay, photography was nice to have, I guess.
Yeah, also steamships were created.
Steamships, I suppose, allow people to visit America. But apart from photography and steamships, what actually was there?
Also stamps. They were very helpful, you know, for post.
Okay, so photography, steamships, and stamps were created. Stamps definitely helped a little, I suppose. There was a fair bit, but nothing that special.
Yeah, there was also rubber tires.
There's more than photography, steamships, stamps, and tires.
Yeah, you mentioned the sewer systems earlier. They came with flushing toilets. They were very new.
Okay, so photography, steamships, stamps, tires, and admittedly, flushing toilets with a better sewer system were a bonus. But the Victorian era hasn't done a whole lot for us.
Okay, what about the Underground Railway?
Okay, that definitely helped transportation a bit. Okay, so photography, steamships, stamps, tires, flushing toilets with a better sewer system, and the Underground Railway. I'm assuming that's it.
Nope, you have the tram system and a lot more that I just haven't mentioned.
Okay, so photography, steamships, stamps, tires, flushing toilets with a better sewer system, the Underground Railway, and the tram system. I get the point.
Honestly, pretty impressed that you managed to repeat all of that back to me.
Why, thank you. I mean, that has all benefited us, but that doesn't change the fact that Victorian Britain was not a nice place to live in.
Yeah, I'd say so, guys. Taz, those are some really good points you were bringing up. Do you mind going into more detail, like Oscar did, about some of the better sides of London?
Yeah, okay. So the first photograph was taken by Louis Daguerre in France and William Henry Fox Talbot in Britain. They had like really long exposure times, which I think was a minimum of 15 minutes. So this is why you never really see people smiling in old photos, because they have to stand there 15 minutes. The first stamp, which was adhesive, was the penny black, and is currently worth, if you were to sell it now, about 348,000, which is a lot of money. Moving on to the transport section. Trams allowed greater loads to be pulled due to the reduced friction of running along steel tracks. And they didn't require extra horses, which is cool. And they were a lot faster than horse-drawn buses. The first underground train opened in 1863 and was the Metropolitan Railway, which ran between Paddington and Farrington. The first iron steamship to go to sea was the 116-ton Aaron Manby, built in 1821 by Aaron Manby, and that crossed the English Channel to Paris.
I also like to say a huge thank you to Discovery Tours and the original Jack the Ripper walk and our guide, John Bennett. You need to check him out as he has written 4 books on the subject, and he also co-wrote the Channel 5 documentary, Jack the Ripper, The Definitive Story, and is currently writing a book for Penguin.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you both, guys. That was some really, really deep conversation about, you know, Victorian life, and I think you both did very well in your research. So, good job. Get a little round of applause by me, and I hope everyone else at home could give you a little round of applause for that. Good little section right there. But we'll stop it there. But that was a good discussion. You guys out there who are watching this right now, what do you think Victorian Britain was? Was it a good thing or a bad thing overall? You can comment down wherever the comment section is, or you could just, you know, text us there or message us or email us or do whatever with it. We'd love to hear your responses. But I think it's time to wrap up this episode. We all hope that you've enjoyed it and can take at least one thing away. As usual, make sure to like, subscribe, and a special bonus for you. Next week, you can see our tour, the Jack the Ripper tour, completely raw and unedited.
Talking of which, before you disappear, we're looking for new presenters to join us. All we ask is that you're passionate and caring, but quite bold and humble, prepared to share your opinion while considering others, and hope you enjoy the opportunities we can bring you. So you need to work hard for that. Personally, I might also suggest that you check out the Unedited show to see what the day's really like. And we also ask that you're a member of Serious Young Performers, have been accepted to Sirius Film, TV, and the theatrical agency. And if you show these attributes mentioned, you could be presenting with us very soon.
Well said, Taz. That's greatly said. Again, from me as well, I couldn't recommend Sirius enough, to be honest. I wouldn't be here on this course with on the other side of the camera if it wasn't for Siriusly Good TV, from turning from actor to more of a filmmaker. It gives you so many opportunities. It's really, I would really recommend it, and would love to work with new people, because I think that's a great thing to do. But enough of that. Let's just wrap this up now. This is the final show of a damned year known as 2020, and so to January 2021. We will have a serious debate about how 2020 has affected us and what we hope 2021 might bring our way. This will be a more serious, deep conversation about topics, but it also has some more funny sides to it. We're still planning it out, but it should be a really good episode. Be sure to check that out. Make sure to check out the show when it broadcasts early January. Before that though, we hope to see Yolanda pass her driving test. We will be there on the film the day on the 6th of January. But for now, this has been Elliot. I hope you have a lovely Christmas and a happy New Year. You guys, Taz and Oscar, do you have any final last words to say for the people for the last time this year?
Ooh, that's difficult. I'm gonna have to say Woodside is my final word.
Really? You?
Yeah.
No one's gonna get this. No one out here, no one out of you will know what this is about. They're just trying to make fun of me. It's not funny. It's not entertaining. It's just bullying at this point. It's really not nice. I do not like it. Everyone just go and blame Taz for being mean.
I think everyone should comment down Woodside. Everyone comment down Woodside. Oscar, any final words?
Swear to God,
yeah, thank you all for watching and have a happy new year.
Hey, something nice, brilliant. Hey, love to hear it. Anyways, yes, this has been us. We wish you all a happy Christmas and we'll see you all next year. But for now, bye from us all from the studio.
Woodside.
Bye bye, bye bye, bye bye.
Woodside.